wrap this up. Okay. This one like that. It's better than you. Okay. Back and forth. Laser may not work because of the screen. I'm sorry? The laser will probably not work because of the screen. But you can just... Back and forth. Oh, okay. Good afternoon. Let's get started. Our speaker next week is Commissioner William D. Magwood, who is the current commissioner at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and he'll talk to us on nuclear regulation and construction post-Fukushima. Please join us next week for that enlightening and very deeply insightful talk. We have a slight change in the announced speaker and the announced program for this evening. Our announced speaker was Bob Lukfar, who could not join us because of a business emergency, but fortunately he could send his partner and co-CEO, Balu Balagopal, who is here with us. Balu is co-CEO of Nat-G CNG Solutions and Nat-G CNG Conversions. He recently left his role as a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group to start Nat-G, where he is a co-CEO, as I said. He has 25 years of experience in energy, industrial, and technology sectors, and has worked in a range of different aspects of business, including B2B marketing, business development, strategy, finance, mergers and acquisitions, you basically name it. He has held very senior executive positions at the El Paso Corporation and also at the El Paso Merchant Energy, where he led a 100% group with line responsibility for execution of numerous investments across the energy value chain. He holds an MBA with distinction from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. He holds an MS from Auburn and a bachelor's in chemical engineering from Indian Institute of Technology in India. It's a real pleasure to have you here, Balu, and we really look forward to hearing from you on natural gas. Okay, great.
Thank you very much, Varun, for that kind introduction. And I told Krista when I called this morning that I've been a perennial beneficiary of the bait and switch my entire career. And I always was advertised as something different, and I was able to get some breaks. So hopefully I'll do justice to Bob. It's been about 2.5 years now that I've been on this journey. We started the company about 2.5 years ago. And so the recently is getting a little bit more, less recent. But I just want to do some tiebacks here. The speaker next week is from the NRC, or the nuclear. And at BCG, we worked a lot across the energy spectrum. And it's quite interesting to see that energy is always an interplay. It's an interplay between fuel mixes. And in the role that I'm now, I'll be tempted to talk as though this fuel were the only fuel that mattered. And it's rarely the case. If you take a broad-based perspective of energy policy, it's always about multiple energy sources feeding the world's demand for energy. It's always been that case. Switching between fuels is sometimes overhyped, underhyped, and as they say, it's the pace at which fuel switching occurs tends to be typically understated, but the extent to which it occurs tends to be overstated. And these things keep playing all their way through. That being said, the reason we were quite fascinated by, I spent a career looking at alternative fuels, and a lot of times it seemed to be the promise of the future. And post-Fukushima, natural gas has gotten a lot of additional press because natural gas is that fuel that actually stands as a bridge. Some people call it the bridge to the future. But increasingly is that bridge becoming the destination. And natural gas is taking on a very peculiar role all around the world for that reason. Post-Fukushima, one of the lowest cost, low carbon sources of power, for example, nuclear, has suddenly become, hugely in question. And Japan is importing ever more LNG than ever did. In our own country, we have been blessed with this incredible advance, as you all may know, about fracking. And fracking has essentially, or unconventional gases, has essentially turned the entire landscape upside down in terms of supply, demand, the dynamics between the different fuels. We started Nat-G as a way to really play into that phenomenon. And if you have all the supply of natural gas, what are you going to do with it? Well, there's power. Clearly switching from coal to power or nuclear to power, as the case may be, is definitely happening. It's happening at a pretty substantial rate. Companies are making very clear economic decisions in terms of, do I upgrade my coal scrubbers and so on and so forth, or do I go to natural gas? There's petrochemicals, which you're seeing. And I started my career as a chemical engineer in the Gulf Coast petrochemical industry, which then all proceeded to leave and go to the Middle East, and now all that's coming back. And then you have things like gas to liquids and so on and so forth. But the big aha there is also on transportation. And so we actually started Nat-G with the goal of making it easy, affordable, and reliable to move America's trucking fleet, particularly to natural gas. And as we like to say, let's use the natural gas and export our oil. So the other thing I noticed about natural gas as for transportation is a lot of alternative fuels always suffer from this problem of it's always in the future. You know, the technology is not mature. It's a very, take biofuels for example. If you really wanted to substitute diesel, there's no biofuel out there to substitute diesel. You can have sugar diesel approaches and things that go from sugars to diesel, but they're all experimental. They're all in the lab scale. We have been disappointed with the pace at which that has happened. And the list goes on. It's a long time before we have an electric truck. In terms of energy density and so on and so forth. It'll happen, but it's not quite here. Whereas I'm going to talk to you about today is happening. We at Nat-G are going to convert upwards of 500 vehicles this year. We just got started. And so it's happening. And what I hope to do today is to expose you a little bit to what's happening at the coalface in this particular part of the world, part of the landscape, and would very much like to invite your questions and make this a discussion. I'll go through some slides, but we can either take Q&A at the end or as we go through. That's why I called it Natural Gas Vehicles. The future is here now. I'm not talking about stuff that is down the road. I'm talking about stuff that's happening. We can spend an entire lecture or two or three on energy policy and the different fuels. I will try to resist the temptation to do that. I've already not done a good job on that, but I'll resist the temptation to get into that. And in the Q&A, if you want to engage on the prospects for different fuels, happy to give you what I know and what my views might be. But this is a very simple graphic I want to just put on the table. There was a time when we thought we didn't have gas. When I was at El Paso, we started our LNG strategy. We have 4 LNG terminals. This is back in the early 2000s. 4 LNG terminals. There were basically 35 permit applications on the books for LNG import terminals because we really saw this happening. And we didn't know, and it just goes to show how poor our predictive capability is. All the studies, all the consulting work, all the corporate work, nobody ever said that we would be here 10 years from now. And then this happens, called unconventional resources. This happened on the oil side, be it tight oil, be it deep water drilling. But on the natural gas side, it's been shale gas. And what the shale gas phenomenon has done is it's made a massive pool of resource available. And this resource has some certain peculiar aspects to it. It can be turned on or off. And as a result, again, we can spend a whole lecture on natural gas pricing. But a simple reality might be natural gas pricing is now in a band. It'll never exceed that band. It'll never go below a certain amount because it's just not productive or economic to do so. It'll never go above a certain band because the rig supply will immediately flood in. There's a lot of resource. That resource is at least 100 times our current current demand. And that's the other aspect to this. There are some fuels where, yes, they might work in a niche sense, but can it be a mainstream fuel? We consume as Americans, the total world consumption is 84 million barrels, right? So we consume something like 7 or 8. If we wanted to basically substitute all of that, you need a fuel that can hold its own in terms of supply. And natural gas has the ability to do that. Okay, so let's take that as a given. The natural gas prices are going to be in a collar, that the supply is abundant. Okay, so what? Why natural gas vehicles? There are a few simple reasons. And again, this is, in alternate energy work, you always are trading off benefits. You know, it's green, but then the technology is not mature. It's green, but it's too expensive. Whereas here you have an interesting confluence of forces. Fuel for as low as $1 a gallon. I'm not kidding you. That's what we fill our trucks at our facility in Houston and San Antonio and Shreveport. Now, if you go to a public station, it's more. But even that can vary quite. In Corpus Christi, you can fill up for 94 cents a gallon, equivalent, BTU adjusted. Think about that for a minute, right? The significance of that. Volatility. Oil prices, I don't know what oil prices are going to do. They could be up, they could be down. I've long given up trying to predict. But that's tremendous volatility. Delta Airlines bought a refinery. Now you'd say, why would an airline buy a refinery? It was not for cost. It was for volatility management. And trying to minimize what a crack spread volatility could do to their business. Similarly, if you're a plumber, if you're a trucking company running on thin margins, this volatility is hugely important. If you're an airline, of course it's important, but so are many, many fleets. With natural gas, because of this band that you're operating in, you essentially have taken over the volatility. And the other thing is that on a BTU adjustment basis, every dollar rise in the Henry Hub price of natural gas, everybody knows Henry Hub pricing, so it's around $4 right now. If it goes up $1, the CNG cost per gallon goes up 13 cents. That's just the way the BTU math works out. So it's not volatile. It's proven technology, and I'll show you the data on that. I mean, there's just these things are running all over the place. So yeah, that could be improved. Yeah, there are rough spots. Yes, there are things that could be done more. Yes, there are things that can't be done. But it is not something that is voodoo at this point. It's being done. Get paid to go green. Because from a green standpoint, now I'll be honest with you, we do a lot of fleet calls, and the discussion rarely goes to green. People like to take the green as a last benefit, unfortunately. But the fact is, if you're in Houston or in the Texas Triangle areas that are non-attainment, the particulate reduction is tremendous. I mean, you're talking a substantial reduction, 90% reduction in NOx and so on and so forth. Carbon dioxide, you get a material reduction if you're thinking about carbon in the atmosphere. But the particulates, NOx, SOx, are quite significant. If you're a school bus operator, it's stunning what happens when you convert your fleet over to natural gas. How many of you have flown from Bush Airport? Okay, if you you don't think about it probably now. When you go out into the parking areas where the shuttles are all coming, you don't smell the fumes anymore as much. Whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, I mean, you just came out and the smell would just assault you of the diesel fumes. You don't have that anymore because the fleet's running on natural gas. So it's very clean. This has been important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people. Energy independence is truly within our grasp. We are at a point now, and who'd have thunk, right? I mean, we're at a point now where we might actually export oil. We certainly can export gas, and there's a lot of movement to export LNG. But if we start using our natural gas for consumption here, we can export the liquid, which is crude. And because the shale has also created a crude boom. Recycled fuel savings economy. The multiplier effect of something like this is quite tremendous. Bill Gates is fond of saying that in poor countries, energy is one of the single greatest levers that you can help, because energy costs for a poor family in Africa are quite significant. But that holds true also in our rich world. I was struck by a plumber who is converting all his trucks over to natural gas, and he said something interesting to me. He said, because of this, he's now able to have enough money in his pocket. These are bottom line savings in his pocket. He could hire somebody new. He could expand his service radius. He could buy a new vehicle. He could run, a few more vehicles for the same price, operational cost. And you multiply that effect all through the economy. It's a pretty significant multiplier effect. So we truly believe that, our business aside, this is something that that is good for our country. The images that you see are just images of what we do. Those are a whole bunch of trucks on their way, on truck carriers. They come to Houston and they get converted and they go on their way. We do school buses and so on and so forth. Now, natural gas vehicles come in 3 flavors. And there's a lot of confusion around this. There's bi-fuel gasoline or natural gas. And that's the F-150 pickup. And right now we can do just about most of the GM line, most of the Ford line. When I say we can do, it's not a technology limitation, it's an EPA limitation. The EPA certifies all these systems for use, and you cannot modify an engine by law if you don't have an EPA certification. And so our supplier network of manufacturers essentially have all passed the EPA certification tests, and it costs a fair bit of money to get a cert. So people have gone for the low-hanging fruit, the Fords, the GMs. I never knew this, but America's fleet is all GM and Ford. I mean, you will have a little bit of Dodge, but you think about Toyotas and stuff, and you just don't see them. And so people have gone after the big sweet spots of the fleets, the work fleets. And that's one of our vehicles. I can tell you it runs beautifully. It accelerates. You can't tell the difference. When I fill up at our facility, it costs us, as I said, I think our cost is 90 cents a gallon, 95 cents a gallon. When we fill up in Austin here, it costs me about $23 to fill up. If I go pull over to the Valero, it's $65 or $70. And once you do it only once. Once you start driving this, you don't go back, especially if you're driving a truck. Isuzu box trucks. This is the delivery trucks that are ubiquitous around any metro area. These are both biofuel, which means that they can toggle between gasoline and CNG. It's fantastic. So there's no range anxiety. So when I drive to San Antonio doesn't have public infrastructure built yet. It's coming. But on the way back, if I run out of gasoline, I can come back on CNG. But you know what I do? I come through Austin, because I don't want to drive on gasoline. So I actually take a detour and come through Austin, fill up, and then go, because I'm hooked on the savings. But I don't have any range anxiety. Now, then we can do what's called dedicated. Now, if you have a diesel engine, school bus or a big truck, diesel is a compression-ignited engine as opposed to gasoline, which is a spark-ignited engine. And CNG is a spark-ignited engine. And so with diesels, you cannot have biofuel. So you have only 2 choices. You can do dedicated, which is we replace the engine with a CNG-only engine. Now, there obviously you have to pay more attention to the infrastructure, because in CNG infrastructure is not quite there yet. Or you can do what's called dual fuel, which is, this is an example of some of the trucks we do. The natural gas is mixed in with diesel, and it's a blend of about 50 to 60% substitution is what you get. And the great thing about that, again, you don't have range anxiety, because the worst thing that happens to you is you run on diesel. CNG versus LNG. How many of you have been in the debates around LNG for trucking and T. Boone Pickens's LNG highways? How many of you are aware of that part of discussion in our energy debate? Okay. People talk about LNG versus CNG. LNG as a fuel, we're agnostic, but LNG as a fuel is energy dense, so people think you can fit more. The problem with LNG is it's a very expensive fuel. So, for example, a gallon of CNG can cost, let's say, $1.25 if you wanted to, if you're in some, certain, depending on your gas costs. LNG is going to cost you $2.60 or $2.50. Now, all of a sudden, the spread between diesel and LNG is a lot smaller. And as a result, you eat into the economic savings. Plus, it's more difficult to transport. It's, it fits the oil company model where you make everything in a central place and you ship it around. But the beauty of natural gas, particularly in America, now this won't hold true for China, but in America, natural gas is everywhere. We have a ubiquitous natural gas network. There are pipelines everywhere. And so we think that CNG is a far more accessible solution than LNG, although LNG has its role in certain applications. The business case is very compelling. I mean, lest you think that this is theoretical, here are some facts. Here's a heavy-duty dual-fuel CNG truck. Imagine you're an owner-operator. And you drive 80,000 miles a year, and you get 60% CNG substitution. It'll cost you about $37,000 to convert that engine. The fuel savings could be, at the public station, anywhere from, let's say, $20,000 a year. Think about the economics for a minute. 18-month payback. And these people keep their trucks for years. Years. So a little bit of a compelling business case. The internal rate of return greater than 80%. We like to tell people, how many projects in your company have an IRR greater than 80%? The business case is extraordinarily compelling. Let's say you're a light duty, this is a plumber van, this is Nutex Plumbing. And Nutex Plumbing is a plumbing company. They're probably about 60 vehicles. They're all over Houston. This is a light duty biofuel CNG van, 40,000 miles a year. Conversion costs. When we started the business, conversion costs were at $13,000. We've been able to drive those costs down relentlessly. As volume grows, our experience curve grows, our supply chain gets more efficient. We're driving that down. It's now $9,500 a year. Fuel savings anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 a year. Payback again, 18 to 24 months. IRR greater than 70%. And this is assuming you're fueling at a public station anywhere between $1.50 and $2. Now, there's a wide array of dispersion in prices simply because it's not a mature fueling infrastructure yet. And so you have monopoly behavior in certain cases. If you go to Oklahoma, it's $1.30. This is a transportation company and run by a guy named Ed. Ed's got 70 trucks. They run all over the country. He hauls groceries from New York, from Iowa to New York, and then they turn around and go everywhere else. I mean, a little bit of the heartbeat of America feel to Ed, And Ed's a very cautious guy, but Ed's margins are really thin. Ed has to pay his drivers a lot. Fuel is one of his biggest expenses. And I'll tell you, talk about thin margin businesses, Ed has a thin margin business. It matters to him. When fuel prices spike, Ed loses money because his customers don't absorb the costs, because trucking is a very competitive business. So we talked to him. Now, it's taken 6 months, but we're going to do a pilot. And a pilot's necessary because Ed's not convinced. Ed wants to know it works. And it's correct to know about that. So we said, let's do 3. We're going to convert these. They're going to cost about $36,995 to be precise. These trucks are going to run along the Iowa to San Antonio route. They're going to come right through Austin, go on the way down San Antonio and back. And we talked a lot about. I'll talk a lot about private fueling, which we're doing a lot of, and the economics of that. But Ed can basically stop at predetermined points and fill up, and go all the way back. He's going to save $1.53 a diesel gallon equivalent. So Ed's going to save $20,221 $20,000 per year, $60,000 a year for all 3. Simple payback is 1.8 years for him. we're going to lease it. We do full financing now because one of the things, financing always helps people get over the line, and so we do full financing now. And it's going to cost them $700 a month for that truck, $2,000, $2,100 for all three. So if you subtract one from the other, in your pocket savings, close to $12,000 per vehicle, or $36,000 a year for all three. There's nothing Ed can do in his business, nothing, that'll get him that return. And by the way, these truckers, I never knew all this, but truckers are amazing. They will look for, if you go and sell them a little wind deflector that you can put on the top made out of polyurethane, that's your own special polymer, and you can charge him $300 for a $2 item, but it'll save him a little bit on gasoline or diesel, he'll do it. Because that's how efficient their business has become. So for Ed, he doesn't want to do it. Why doesn't Ed want to do it? Nobody likes change. Nobody likes to tell the drivers, you got to deal with natural gas. It looks a little different, the hose is a little different. Nobody wants change. It doesn't matter how good it is. So change requires a potential function. And the potential function is this. So Ed's finally come around kicking and screaming to agree to do 3 because every advisor he has around him tells him, Ed, you got to do this. So Ed's going to do this. Now, why is Ed worried? Ed's got the usual worries. It's going to work. It's going to break down. Or my driver's going to like it. Fair questions. But he's going to get hooked. And he's going to spend over 5 years, which is lease terms, he's going to save, his total savings is $176,000. Now, Ed's trying to sell his business, by the way, in the meantime. So Ed's looking at this and going, my EBITDA suddenly went up, didn't it? So the valuation on his business is going up. So tremendous multiplier effects to all this. Over 7 years, which is what he keeps his vehicles for, that's $300,000 for all these, just 3 vehicles. And he's got 70. So it's a pretty major, and we can, oh, by the way, and this is not about, the technology is coming in 2017. 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have it delivered to him. So this is a proposition that we believe natural gas represents. And it's a very here and now proposition. It doesn't require government funding. We're not asking, Ed's not getting any grants. This is all as is, which is the way it should be. Now, if you add private fueling, the case gets even stronger. And why is that? So let's talk about fueling. There's a chicken and egg. When we started the business, one of the things that we immediately realized was there's a big chicken and egg issue. And that's why it's not a consumer product yet. We as consumers are trained to have a gas station. Do you ever go and fill up when you have to take a left turn? I never take a left turn to a gas station. I just don't. Never happens. It has to be a right turn. And so, that's the behavior we are tuned into. We are far away from that. We have 989 stations, I think. We're far away from that. So infrastructure is a problem. But it doesn't matter. It really truly doesn't matter. It's not a consumer product for a lot of reasons yet. Now, if you're driving an F-150, anybody from Houston? All right, you go down 45, and you see these folks in big King Ranch F-150s going up and down, right? Those folks, there's a no-brainer. But for most people, if you're driving 10,000, 12,000 miles here, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Now, we're coming up with some very exciting home fueling products, which we'll announce next year. We've had so many people approach us, and we get all excited, and they want to sign us up as their exclusive distributor, and we get all excited, and it blows up. But so we're waiting for the one that won't blow up. And we think we have 2 candidates that are made it through all the gauntlet and their final UL certifications. And when that comes, it's going to be quite exciting. Where you're going to have, it looks like a little Glade air freshener thing. It's in a garage. And you can just fill up. But we don't think even that is a consumer product, because where we're going to aim that product is going to be for the HVAC fleets. People like HVAC folks, anybody who gets a truck to take home, it's a problem because they go home. So the company can put a leased fueling station in your garage, in the plumber's garage. And as long as he or she's with the company, they get to use that and fuel up. Or if you're an oil field hand and you're going into the Eagle Ford Shale, and you're out there somewhere and you have access to a gas line, a small gas line, but you can't really have a station. But when we started the business, private fueling stations were $2 million. We now have brought that cost down. This is what's called the Nat-G 500. Now we have the Nat-G 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 4,500, and so it goes. But the Nat-G 500 is a self-contained, it's completely engineered, it's all one piece. It's plug and play. You just have an electric connection, a three-phase connection, and a gas connection. It works on regular line pressures. It can work as low as 10 to 12 psi. You need the gas flow. It requires about 3,000 feet per hour, which is typically available from your local utility. And this particular customer gets it on a trailer, so he wants to move it around. So he can move it around. He's a taxi cab company. So we do things like that. I didn't put a picture of another one, which is what we call the Nat-G 200. It's about this big. It's just like a fridge. And it can handle about a fleet of about five vehicles. So if you're a small plumber, you can do that. Or if you're a big energy company like the one we just commissioned this week, this is a full-fledged station. But even that, we've been able to drive the pricing down. This station was installed for about $750,000. When we started the business, when we started getting quotes from people, because our original idea was to build a lot of stations, we were told $2 million a pop. Now we are at $750,000. But let me give you this. This is our customer. It's a large energy company. We're converting 400 of their vehicles over time. This is a Nat-G 4500 private fueling station. They're going to save $3.1 million in fuel savings. And the total cost of program, if you took it at, it's a rolling program, but if you took it as a simple payback, 18 months. It's a real life story. It's happening. It's in South Texas, a place called Encinal, and it's just really exciting. Because you're saving an additional 0.70 cents to $1.20 per gallon. Why is that? Because your gas, in their case, this company, their fuel cost is going to be 80 cents a gallon. 80. That's because they have a pipeline coming through. They're getting right off the pipeline, and there you go. Now, if you're in Houston, you've got all the transportation charges. The utility adds a lot of charges. It can be more. Let me pick up the pace here. This is a vast growth market. There are 120 million trucks in America. 120 million cars, although we're not focusing on that. The average age is 10 years. Globally, we talk about the technology being proven. 2.1 vehicles were sold in 2012, and 16 million CNG vehicles are on the road. In America, 16,000 was sold in 2012, and 130,000 total. And yet we're sitting on this bonanza of gas. We're sitting on economics like that. So we really think that there's a huge market here. Just 4% penetration. Italy has 3%, Brazil has 5%, Argentina has 16%. Just 4% penetration is a $15 billion a year market. Just for the vehicle side of it, the automotive side of it. Public infrastructure, if we just matched Italy in terms of density of power CNG stations, we will need 5,000 new stations to match the energy, to keep up with this 4%. And there's a lot of talk in the public around CNG and natural gas, and the president comes on and talks about this or that. And they always talk about the OEMs, Detroit changing over, etc. It's irrelevant. The real opportunity is our massive installed base. Keep in mind, it's 10.4 years, the average age of a truck in America. So the massive installed base of in-service vehicles and private fueling, because people say, oh my gosh, we need a big government program. Mr. Boone Pickens has gone on record saying, the government could just step in, build all these LNG stations, and help my company do that from your pocket to mine, and wouldn't we be all better? Right? And the answer is, Boone, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. This thing can stand on its own two legs. And private fueling on top of this in Achilles, unlike gasoline, you don't have how many of you have a gasoline line running under your house that you could tap into? You have a gasoline line? I want to buy your house. If you had a gasoline line underneath your house and you could tap into it, would you go to Valero? Worth thinking about. But that's what we have with natural gas. It's everywhere. By the way, the switching heating oil between propane and natural gas is a well-studied phenomenon. And every time natural gas comes over to a neighborhood, people switch. So, because it's ubiquitous. A few years ago, the American Natural Gas Association, bless their hearts, they put this big program, went to Detroit and said, you guys have got to get behind us, right? You've got to get behind us. And so they said, okay, we will do a few new vehicles, Ford and GM and all these folks. Great. We're talking about 15 to 20,000 max, maybe max being done, 200,000 max. What happens to the remaining 4 or 5 million trucks each year? They go into this installed base pool, the 120 million pool. So we are focusing as a company, not just here, although we do a lot of new vehicles, we're focusing on that, ED. We're focusing on ED. ED. And ED Ed doesn't buy new vehicles because Ed doesn't have the money to buy new vehicles. Ed keeps his vehicles for 10.4 years. That's who we need to go after. And so from an energy policy perspective, people talk about new vehicles and say this is irrelevant. We will not make natural gas a 20% fuel if we don't go after the installed base. And that's what we're trying. The good news is we're able to do that. By the way, if you're a fleet owner, this is a fleet that we work with. If you do both if you just did your new vehicles each year as you replaced them, as you bought new vehicles, the dark green line tells you how much you would save in that 4 or 5 year period. But if you took all your existing in-service vehicles and you can see the big bump you get in fuel savings. So for fleets, you want to do both. So that's about the vehicle market. Now you say, well, why isn't it happening? It really reminds you of the early days of IT. There was a thing called computers, and people just didn't want to switch. There were too many barriers. It's difficult. You don't know where to go. You don't know where to find things. You find the monitor, but you can't find the computer. You don't know who's going to give you the CAT cable. And an industry sprang up to service that, solution providers. And that's what we are. We work with fleets to provide turnkey solutions, vehicles, fueling products, financing, maintenance, service. It's a one-stop shop. And that's what we think will motivate fleets to take the plunge, because otherwise it's just too difficult. Too difficult. We're fortunate to have made a lot of progress. We said we'll convert 400 to 500 vehicles this year. Just last week, we got orders for 15 private fueling stations. We've commissioned our first big station down in South Texas. We have 3 more on the books. So this thing's happening. It's going. We're focused on Texas and Louisiana because the gurus tell us that as a smaller company you need to nail and scale it. So we're focused, and we're focused on geography. And we're trying to really bring all the things that a good B2B business needs to have, but particularly in this market because people are not going to switch that easy. It's change. Nobody likes change. And so we're doing all the things that you would expect a company like us to do to make it easy and affordable in our mission. So that's what I had to say, and I'm now open for any Q&A we may want to engage in. Sure.
Yeah, I had a question about what you're using for fuel tanks and what kind of range you get and what the fill times are, just that practical aspect of the vehicle usage.
So the Cng tanks come in 4 varieties, type 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the most expensive, made of composite materials, also lightest. And then on type 1s are typically steel. Type 2s are aluminum with a wire wrap, and type 3s are aluminum with composite liners and composite coverings. They come in a variety of ranges, sizes and shapes. really a wide array. And it's important to have that wide array because the real estate on a truck is at a premium. So we need the options to be able to. So on typical F-150, for example, or 250 or Chevy Silverado, you would have a 24-gallon tank, a Type 4 tank. In terms of fill, I'm sorry, what's your question again on the fill?
Just fill time.
Okay, so natural gas fueling stations have two kinds. There's time fill and fast fill. Time fill is where, think about a school bus fleet that just comes home every night, and they can be hitched up like ponies, and they start filling. In the morning, it's filled up. That's time fill, a more inexpensive solution. Fast fill is exactly what the name implies, is the same experience as going to a gas station. You connect the nozzle and you pump. It's 5-7 minutes, and that's a fast fill station. So we do both fast fill and time fill. In a fast fill scenario, you typically can get a fill. Typically, it'll be 4 or 5 gallons a minute in many of these stations. So it's a 5-minute fill, 5-6 minute fill. Okay. This is somebody in the back there. Okay.
First of all, just thank you for coming and thank you for being here. I was just going to ask you to elaborate really quickly on your forecasting methods. All the payback and the IRR obviously depends heavily on the 10-year forecast for natural gas. You said there was a lot of security. Obviously, that hasn't necessarily been true in the past. Natural gas historically is quite volatile fuel, and there's a lot more going into that projection than just the resource base. So, fill us in.
Yep, that's a great question. I mean, in the energy business, commodity pricing is always something that you are always trying to factor in, and you never have a full line of sight. I mean, by the way, who knows what a forward curve is? What's a forward curve? Come on, somebody knows it. Yeah, I'm just asking, what is a forward curve? Correct. So forward curve is what traders will transact today for a period in the future, and typically has tied to liquidity, the liquidity horizon for that particular commodity. Typically, oil prices will have a 6-month forward because people are willing to transact 6 months to 7 months. Natural gas tends to be 7 to 8 years. Now, what's a spot price for a commodity? When I say spot price, okay, when I say the forward price for natural gas is $4.50 in 2016, I think you understand what that will be. What is the spot price? Take a guess. Prices today. Great, there you go. What would you do if you did a scatter plot and you took all the forward prices that were for today, from, let's say, the historical forward prices for today's transaction date, and you plotted it against spot prices today? So you took today's spot prices, and you took all the contracts from the last months, and you took those forward prices, which traders transacted at, and you just did a scatter plot, or you regressed it. What would be the regression coefficient? You're all engineering folks, right? Huh? There's no relationship. It's a complete scatter plot. Complete scatter plot. And I say that to go to the heart of your question, which is forecasting is a fool's errand, right? So these are traders who are betting their lives on it. Their livelihood, sorry. It may not even be that. But so then you get into what's called fundamentals. You think of fundamentals. And fundamentals actually try to get... The great thing about energy is one of the purest form... How many of you study economics? Who's taking a microeconomics class? All right. What do you think when they're drawing those graphs, doing all those things, What's going through your mind? You're probably going, I don't know if I'll ever use this again. It makes no sense. It's about some random example in a textbook. But energy truly follows microeconomic principles. It's one of the commodity businesses tend to do that. Paper does that. You can actually draw a supply curve, right? And you can actually draw a supply curve for natural gas. And when you draw a supply curve for natural gas, and you do any projections of demand, you see the dynamic that I was talking about. It's quite stunning. So yes, you're right, there are a lot of factors in play, but the price of natural gas, it's going to be very difficult. Never say never, right? Never say never. But you look at the fundamentals, you see a collar at work. So you see where you could go up to $5, $6, but there's just this resource. And it's resource, it's proven, it's there. All you got to do is roll in the rig. On the flip side, you worry that there's no capital discipline. Everybody's putting rigs in. Prices goes down like it did to $250. But that's not sustainable, right? Because people go out of business. So you see that collar. That's one answer to your question. Second part of the answer to your question is volatility. Even if natural gas prices were to double, let's say that they're at $4 an MCF today at Henry Hub. If they were to double to 8, the cost of the CNG is going to be only 50 cents higher. And the reason is because of the BTU. It's divided by 8. It's divided by 8 roughly. And the rest is cost of electricity and things like that. So the commodity cost is a small part of the fuel cost given the BTU dynamics. Third part of your question is, what can actually kill our business, by the way, is, and why this is, if oil prices crash. So it's less about natural prices, gas prices going up. We're not worried about that at all, for all the reasons I gave you, right? But now, oil prices were to crash. We just recently were in, a big strategic partner took a minority stake in our company. And the CEO, very august man, said, what are the risks to your business? And I said, do you believe in $60 oil? And he says, I don't know. I said, do you? And he said, no. I said, if you did, don't invest, because we're toast. Because at $60 oil, that spread comes down, right? So the motivation, now, there are a lot of other reasons to switch, but that potential function that Ed is working with will be much less compelling. So oil prices are a wild card. And oil prices are notoriously difficult to predict because you talked about other factors. About 40% of the price of oil is what we call risk premia. It's geopolitical risk premia. And only about 60% of it is supply-demand explained. Natural gas doesn't behave that way because we're in America, we don't have that issue, right? But, well, they might have an issue in the future. Right now we don't. But with oil, that's not the case. When the Syrian chemical arms deal was signed, the price fluctuated. So there's a premium. So I can't tell you about oil, but if you look at all the supply-demand fundamentals for oil, the thing that keeps jumping back at you is China and India and Brazil and Russia and everywhere else. Because if you then put any kind of demand forecasting on their business, it all comes down to that. If Chinese growth stays up, oil will be about $100 a barrel. It's just going to be. Because the marginal barrel is getting harder to find. So it's a complex answer, but that's the reason why we think this will persist.
Quick question up here. You mentioned earlier that there was a lot of action taking place in South Texas in a place called Indianola. One, could you tell us what the action is? Two, where is Indianola?
It's Encinal.
Encinal, okay. Where is it? What's going on?
It's a good question. Only the people who live there know it. It's truly a place in the middle. It's right off 35 actually. So if you keep going down south, you just get on 35 and just keep going, you'll hit it. It's about a couple hours south of San Antonio, before Laredo, and it's a home to some energy companies, and Lewis Energy's out there, and then you've got an ecosystem of small towns like that, Carrizo Springs, and I never knew all this, but there's an ecosystem out there where significant economic activity occurs. Cotulla, Carrizo Springs, Pearsall, Alice. Yeah. What's that? Exactly. Encinal, E-N-C-I-N-A-L.
There's a question here first.
So I guess there are two questions. One question is, what pressure are you working at? Was that kind of high pressure? Do you worry about a leakage for long-term storage? For gasoline, you can liquid fuel, right? You can put there 3 months, it's still gasoline. But in the tank, compressed gas, you put it 3 months, will the leak kill you?
That's a great question. So let's talk about CNG is different from LNG as it relates to your question. CNG is at 3,600 psi, so it is high pressure. So in a vehicle, you have two parts. When we do work on a vehicle, there are two parts to our work. There's a high pressure system and the low pressure system. The low pressure system is the underhood system, so it's mostly all the engine work, okay, the engine computers and all that. And then the high pressure system is the tank and how you take it from the tank. It's 3,600 psi. With CNG, there's no leak issue. So the tanks are extremely very well sealed. The testing these tanks go through is amazing. The DOT makes these tanks. We're contacted every day by some company in China or in Brazil wanting to sell us tanks. And we say, are you DOT certified? And they say, what is that? And we say, well, you have to fire a bullet through the thing, and you got to drop it into flame, and the DOT makes you do some crazy stuff. But the leakage is not an issue. For LNG, it's a different problem. LNG, by its very nature, even when you have big, have anyone flown to Boston? Okay, if you fly into Boston, as you come in over the bay, back bay, you will see the white spheres. Those are LNG storage tanks. And the LNG storage tanks, LNG just evaporates. I mean, there's a natural fugitive activity that takes place, and you actually have to vent. You have to vent the LNG tanks. So LNG has a fugitive emissions issue. CNG does not. And we had a fire the other day. We got a call. It was a very difficult call for me. One of the Isuzus that we did for the Greater East End Management District burned down. So of course my first thoughts are, oh my gosh. But it turned out it was a gasoline fire. So somebody was washing using a pressure washer, spilled gasoline on a hot manifold, and the truck burned to a crisp. The only thing that survived was a CNG system. The tanks were pretty pristine, although we can't reuse them, but they were pristine. There were no leaks, and the CNG system was fine. Gasoline will ignite because of vapor pressure. Gasoline, as you know, reaches the optimum point very quickly, and it's not space constrained. Whereas with CNG, you need the perfect mixture before it ignite, and therefore, if you're venting it properly, it's actually quite safe.
Okay. Well, the second question is, with the current technology, let's forget about the economics and oil, gas, and gasoline price for now. When do you see this can be applied for consumer, vehicles?
So with consumer vehicles, I think we need to start this whole thing come down to, you can run the math, right? So let's say you're driving 15,000 miles a year. And keep in mind, consumer vehicles are also more fuel efficient. So if you're getting 15 miles or 20, I'm not talking trucks, okay? I'm talking cars. Let's say 20 miles a gallon. So you do the math, and what does it work out to? So 800 gallons per year. And so if you got a $2 spread, that's $1,600. So now you can start seeing, what the price will have to be. A 3-year payback will probably not be attractive. You probably want a 2-year or sub payback. That's one challenge. Second challenge is ubiquity of fuel stations. But that can be got around because you can do biofuels and so on and so forth. But really it comes down to, do the incremental economics work? Now, as the prices come down, I'm sure that'll accelerate some of that.
So this will be installation costs, right?
Say it again?
The installation cost or conversion costs.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
So you're investing
Correct. There's an extra cost, yes.
Right.
Yeah, and that has to come down.
We're out of time. I know there are more questions. Feel free to come and talk to the speaker, but let's really thank Balu. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for making that.
Thank you.
you will be rated with questions.
Sure. Okay.